The photograph hit the internet at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday. By 3:15 a.m., it had been shared 11,000 times. By sunrise, Cairo Montague's entire empire stood on the edge of ruin. The image itself was deceptively simple, a moment frozen in time that never should have been captured. Cairo stood in the doorway of Suite 1407 at the Meridian Hotel, his hand cupping the face of a woman who was decidedly not his fiancée. Her dark curls cascaded over his forearm, his forehead pressed against hers. Their eyes were closed in the kind of intimacy that required no explanation. The woman was Nuria Cole, his fiancée's younger sister. The caption beneath the photograph, posted by an anonymous account, read simply, "The Montague wedding is off. Here's why." Within minutes, the post had been screenshot, reposted, dissected, and distributed across every major gossip platform, news outlet, and social media feed in the country. Entertainment journalists scrambled from their beds. Publicists' phones began their relentless buzzing. And somewhere in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Richelle Cole, the woman who was supposed to become Mrs. Cairo Montague in exactly 48 hours, was about to wake up to the worst morning of her life. But before we get to Richelle, before we witness the moment her world shattered into a million irreparable pieces, we need to understand something crucial about the man at the center of this storm. Cairo Montague was not a careless man. He had built Montague Industries from a modest real estate investment his late father left him into a $6 billion multinational corporation through discipline, precision, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. He didn't make mistakes. He didn't leave loose ends. He planned 17 moves ahead in business deals and applied that same ruthless strategy to every aspect of his existence. So how did a man like Cairo Montague end up photographed in such a compromising position? How did a man who controlled everything lose control of the one thing that mattered most, his own heart? The leaked photo showed only a single frame, but within that frame lived an entire universe of secrets, lies, and a love story that never should have happened. It showed a moment of vulnerability from a man who had spent his entire adult life constructing walls so high that no one, not investors, not competitors, not even his own mother, could ever truly reach him. But Nuria had reached him. Nuria, with her quiet strength and her gentle ways. Nuria, who had entered his life as nothing more than his future sister-in-law, and somehow became the only person who made him feel like something other than a machine designed for acquisition and profit. The photograph didn't capture how they got there. It didn't show the months of resistance, the battles Cairo fought within himself, the countless times he tried to bury what was growing between them beneath layers of denial and duty. It didn't reveal the guilt that consumed him every time he looked at Richelle across the dinner table, knowing that his heart had betrayed her long before his actions ever would. All the photograph showed was the evidence, and evidence, in the court of public opinion, was all anyone ever needed. What would you do if the truth you feared most suddenly became public? Have you ever cared for someone you were never supposed to love? These are not hypothetical questions. They are the questions that Cairo Montague was forced to answer in the span of 48 hours, the most brutal, revealing, and ultimately transformative hours of his 34 years on this earth. This is not a story about a cheating billionaire. That would be too simple, too easy to categorize and dismiss. This is a story about the impossible choices we face when our hearts and our obligations pull us in opposite directions. It is a story about what happens when we build our lives on foundations of expectation rather than authenticity. It is a story about the cost of hiding who we truly are and the even greater cost of finally being seen. Silvergate was a city that worshipped success, nestled between the rolling mountains of the eastern seaboard and the glittering expanse of the Atlantic coastline. It had grown from a modest trading port into one of the nation's most influential metropolitan centers. Glass towers pierced the skyline like monuments to ambition. Luxury vehicles lined the streets of the financial district. Private jets descended into Whitmore International Airport carrying executives, celebrities, and old money dynasties who had chosen Silvergate as their permanent playground. The city operated on an unspoken hierarchy. At the bottom were the dreamers, young professionals who flooded into the metropolis each year, hungry for their piece of the golden promise. In the middle sat the achievers, those who had clawed their way into comfortable six-figure existences and waterfront condominiums. But at the very top, in the rarefied air of penthouses and private clubs, and charity boards that shaped the city's future, lived the elite. And among the elite, one name reigned supreme: Montague. The Montague family had built Silvergate. Not literally, of course, but their influence had shaped nearly every major development in the city's modern history. Montague money had funded the Arts Center downtown. Montague investments had revitalized the Harbor District. Montague philanthropy had constructed the Children's Hospital on the West Side, the Veterans Memorial in Central Plaza, and the scholarship program that sent hundreds of underprivileged students to university each year. For 3 generations, the Montagues had been Silvergate's unofficial royalty. And Cairo Montague was their crown prince. He had inherited his father's business instincts and his mother's razor-sharp social intelligence. By 25, he had doubled the family's real estate holdings. By 30, he had expanded Montague Industries into international markets spanning 4 continents. By 34, he had transformed a substantial family fortune into a $6 billion empire. That touched everything from commercial development to sustainable energy to luxury hospitality. Financial magazines featured him on their covers with headlines like "The Midas of Montague" and "How One Man is Reshaping Global Investment." Business schools studied his acquisition strategies. Competitors tried desperately to replicate his methods. Young entrepreneurs pinned his photographs to their vision boards and memorized quotes from his rare interviews. Cairo Montague didn't just succeed, he dominated. But what made him truly fascinating to the public wasn't merely his wealth or his accomplishments. It was the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence that radiated from him in every room he entered, the measured way he spoke, as though each word had been carefully selected for maximum impact, the dark intensity of his gaze that made investors feel simultaneously terrified and desperate to earn his approval. Cairo didn't walk into a room. He arrived. And when he arrived, everything else faded into background noise. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. Journalists wanted exclusive access to his world. And for years, Cairo had given them just enough, a carefully curated glimpse of perfection that kept the mystique alive while revealing nothing of substance. Until Rizal Cole. Their relationship had begun 3 years ago at a charity gala benefiting the Silvergate Symphony Orchestra. Rizal, daughter of pharmaceutical titan Harrison Cole, had been seated beside Cairo at the head table. She was beautiful in the classical sense, blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, porcelain skin, blue eyes that sparkled with practiced charm. She moved through high society with the ease of someone born into its expectations, and she understood intuitively the unwritten rules that governed their world. By the end of that evening, photographers had captured them laughing together over champagne. By the end of that month, gossip columns had declared them Silvergate's new power couple. By the end of that year, Cairo had presented her with a 7-carat diamond ring that had once belonged to his grandmother, and the city had erupted in celebration. The wedding of Cairo Montague and Rizal Cole was positioned to be the social event of the decade. Invitations had been sent to 800 guests, including senators, foreign dignitaries, and 3 members of European royal families. The ceremony would take place at St. Catherine's Cathedral, followed by a reception at the Montague estate that had required 14 months of planning. Designers had competed for the honor of creating Rizal's gown. Florists had imported rare orchids from 3 different countries. The wedding cake alone had cost more than most people earned in a year. Every detail had been orchestrated to perfection, every element designed to reinforce the narrative of 2 great families uniting, of Silvergate, royalty cementing their dynasty, of a love story that would inspire generations. But narratives are fragile things, and the photograph that surfaced at 2:47 a.m. on that Thursday morning shattered this one beyond repair. Rizal Cole had always been a light sleeper. It was a trait she had inherited from her mother, a nervous energy that kept her hovering, just below the surface of deep rest, ready to snap awake at the slightest disturbance. On most nights, this meant she woke to the distant sound of traffic or the settling of her penthouse walls or the early chirping of birds outside her window. On this particular night, it was her phone. The device vibrated against her nightstand with an urgency that felt almost aggressive. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then a pause. Then again, a relentless buzzing that refused to be ignored. Rissel reached for it with eyes still closed, assuming it was her wedding coordinator with another last-minute crisis. The florist had threatened to quit twice last week. The string quartet had requested a menu change. There was always something. But when she opened her eyes and looked at the screen, she didn't see her coordinator's name. She saw 47 text messages, 23 missed calls, and a notification from a news app that made her blood turn to ice. Breaking: Cairo Montague photographed in compromising position with unidentified woman at the Meridian Hotel. Rissel sat up slowly, her heart beginning its treacherous acceleration. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the phone. Her mind raced through possibilities: a misunderstanding, a manipulated image, a jealous competitor attempting to sabotage the wedding. Cairo had enemies. Powerful men always did. This had to be an attack, a fabrication, a desperate lie. She opened the first message. It was from her maid of honor, containing only a link and 3 words: "I'm so sorry." Rissel clicked the link, and there, on the 6-inch screen clutched in her shaking hands, she saw her fiancé holding another woman with a tenderness he had never once shown her. But it wasn't the intimacy that destroyed her. It wasn't the obvious affection in Cairo's posture. It wasn't even the realization that he had been unfaithful. It was the woman's face. Because the woman in Cairo's arms, the woman he was holding like she was the most precious thing in his universe, was Naraya, her sister, her baby sister, the one person in the world Rissel had trusted completely. A sound escaped her throat, something between a gasp and a scream that she barely recognized as her own voice. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. The room began to tilt, the walls closing in, her chest tightening until she couldn't breathe. 28 years of sisterhood, 3 years of engagement, 18 months of wedding planning, all of it incinerated by a single photograph. Outside Rissel's building, the first news vans had already begun to gather. Someone had leaked her address, probably the same person who had leaked the photograph itself. Within an hour, the sidewalk below her penthouse was crowded with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers hoping to witness the next chapter of the scandal unfold in real time. Cameras pointed upward at her windows. Telephoto lenses attempted to capture any movement behind the curtains. Journalists rehearsed their questions, ready to pounce the moment she emerged. "Rissel, did you know about the affair? How long has this been going on? Will you still marry him? Do you have any comment on your sister's betrayal?" The paparazzi swarm grew larger by the minute. Silvergate police eventually dispatched officers to manage the crowd, but even their presence couldn't diminish the frenzy. This was the biggest scandal the city had witnessed in decades, and every outlet wanted their piece of it. Meanwhile, 17 blocks away, Cairo Montague stood at the window of his own penthouse, watching the chaos consume the city he had once commanded. His mother had left an hour ago, after delivering an ultimatum that still rang in his ears: fix this or lose everything. But how could he fix something he wasn't sure he wanted to repair? How could he return to a life that had been revealed as a carefully constructed lie? His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper, words intended for no one, yet somehow addressing everyone who would eventually hear this story. 48 hours before my wedding, he said quietly, everything I built collapsed. Not because of the photograph, not because of the scandal, but because for the first time in my life, I had allowed myself to feel something real. And reality, I learned, comes with a price. He closed his eyes. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought I wanted, and found everything I didn't know I needed. Before we unfold how a billionaire's world collapsed in 48 hours, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join our storytelling family. Because this journey, it's only just beginning. Nuria Cole had never belonged to the world her sister inhabited. While Rissel had grown up in the Cole family mansion, surrounded by nannies and tutors and the glittering expectations of high society, Naraya had been raised 200 miles away in a small coastal town called Bayshore. Her childhood home was a modest two-story cottage with peeling blue paint and a wraparound porch that creaked beneath her feet. Her bedroom window overlooked not a manicured garden, but the wild Atlantic Ocean, endless and untamed and full of secrets. She was the product of an affair. Harrison Cole, pharmaceutical magnate and patriarch of one of Silvergate's wealthiest families, had spent one summer in Bayshore 26 years ago. He had met a local woman named Celeste, a painter who sold her watercolors at the weekend market and lived according to tides rather than schedules. Their romance had been brief, passionate, and entirely inappropriate for a man of his station. When Celeste discovered she was pregnant, Harrison had offered money, support, discretion. What he had not offered was acknowledgement. So Naraya had grown up knowing her father only as a name on quarterly checks and occasional birthday cards signed by his secretary. She had watched from a distance as her half-sister appeared in society pages, wearing designer gowns at debutante balls while Naraya wore second-hand dresses to her public school dances. She had accepted, with the quiet resignation of someone who understood her place in the world, that she would never truly belong to the Cole dynasty. Her mother had died when Naraya was 7, a car accident on a rainy October evening that had left her orphaned and adrift. But rather than reaching out to claim her, Harrison Cole had simply increased the checks and arranged for Naraya to live with her maternal grandmother, a retired school teacher named Josephine who smelled like lavender and believed that kindness was the only currency that truly mattered. Grandma Josephine had raised Naraya with books and homemade soup and long walks along the shoreline. She had taught her to find beauty in ordinary moments, the way sunlight filtered through morning fog, the sound of waves retreating over pebbled beaches, the quiet satisfaction of a garden well tended. She had instilled in Naraya a groundedness that no amount of money could purchase and no amount of rejection could shake. When Josephine passed away during Naraya's final year of university, she had left behind only the cottage, a collection of handwritten recipes, and a letter that Naraya still kept folded in her wallet. "My darling girl," the letter read, "you have always been enough. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise. Your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it. Your worth is written in the stars that watched over you every night of your life. Go forward with courage, love deeply, and remember that the quietest souls often carry the loudest light." Naraya had carried those words with her when she finally accepted Harrison Cole's invitation to join the family. It had come 3 years ago, shortly after Josephine's death, when Naraya was 23 and utterly alone in the world. Harrison, perhaps motivated by guilt or mortality or the urging of his public relations team, had reached out with an offer she couldn't refuse: a position at Cole Pharmaceuticals, an apartment in Silvergate, and the chance to finally know her sister. Rizal had welcomed her with open arms and genuine warmth. Whatever resentment Naraya might have expected from her legitimate half-sister simply wasn't there. Instead, Rizal had embraced her as the sibling she'd always wanted, introducing her to Silvergate society, including her in family dinners, treating her not as the shameful product of an affair but as a long-lost treasure finally returned. For the first time in her life, Naraya had experienced what it meant to have a family, and she had promised herself she would never do anything to jeopardize it. The position at Cole Pharmaceuticals lasted 18 months before corporate restructuring eliminated her department entirely. Naraya had been preparing to return to Bayshore to reopen her grandmother's cottage and figure out her next chapter, when Rizal had intervened with an alternative plan. "Cairo needs a new executive assistant," Rizal had announced over brunch one Sunday morning. "His last one retired, and he's been interviewing candidates for weeks without finding anyone suitable. You would be perfect." Naraya had nearly choked on her mimosa. "Me? Working for your fiancé? Why not?" Rizal had shrugged elegantly. "You're organized, you're calm under pressure, and you actually listen when people talk, which is apparently rare in the assistant world. Plus, it keeps you in Silvergate. I'm not ready to lose my sister again." The word sister had melted whatever resistance Naraya might have offered. 2 weeks later, she had walked through the glass doors of Montague Industries for her first day of work. She noticed him before he noticed her. Cairo Montague stood at the head of a conference table, addressing a room full of executives with the quiet authority of a general commanding troops. His voice carried without shouting. His presence filled the space without demanding attention. Every person in that room leaned slightly toward him, as though drawn by gravitational force. Nerea had seen photographs of him, of course. She had sat through dinners where he occupied the seat beside her sister. But seeing him in his natural element, commanding, focused, utterly in control, was something else entirely. He was handsome in a severe way. Sharp jaw, dark hair, eyes the color of storm clouds. But it wasn't his appearance that struck her. It was the exhaustion hidden beneath his polished exterior, the tension in his shoulders that no one else seemed to notice. The way his smile, when it appeared, never quite reached his eyes. Nerea recognized that particular brand of loneliness. She had worn it herself for most of her life. When the meeting concluded and the executives filed out, Cairo finally turned his attention to the young woman waiting quietly by the door. "You must be Nerea," he said, extending his hand. "Racel speaks highly of you." His handshake was firm but not aggressive. Professional, measured. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Montague," Nerea replied. "I'll do my best to exceed your expectations." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps at her directness. Most people stammered in his presence. Most people tried too hard to impress him. But Nerea simply stood there, calm and steady, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Cairo," he corrected. "Mr. Montague was my father." She nodded. "Cairo, then." He studied her for a moment longer than necessary, as though trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't known existed. Then he handed her a tablet containing his schedule and walked toward his office without another word. But Nerea noticed that he glanced back at her once before disappearing through the door, and she noticed that her heart had done something strange in response. The first weeks were professional, entirely professional. Nerea learned his schedule, his preferences, his habits. She discovered that he took his coffee black, that he despised unnecessary meetings, that he worked through lunch more often than not, and that he became irritable when his mother called during business hours. She organized his calendar with precision, anticipated his needs before he expressed them, and maintained the appropriate boundaries between assistant and executive. But boundaries, she would later learn, have a way of shifting when two people spend 12 hours a day in close proximity. It began with small moments. A shared glance during a particularly tedious investor presentation. A quiet laugh when a client mispronounced synergy for the 14th time in a single meeting. A cup of tea that Nerea placed on his desk without being asked, simply because she had noticed he seemed tired. "How did you know I needed this?" Cairo had asked, looking at the steaming cup with something approaching wonder. "You rubbed your temples 3 times during the Henderson call," Nerea replied. "You only do that when you're fighting a headache." He had stared at her then, really stared, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "No one has ever noticed that before," he said quietly. Nerea had simply shrugged. "I pay attention." What she didn't say was that paying attention to him had become alarmingly easy, that she found herself cataloging his expressions, his moods, his rare moments of genuine amusement, that she had begun looking forward to their late nights at the office not because she was dedicated to her job, but because those hours belonged only to them. They talked during those nights, not about business, but about life, about books they had read and places they dreamed of visiting, about Nerea's grandmother and the cottage in Bayshore, about Cairo's father, who had died when Cairo was 22, leaving behind an empire and an impossible set of expectations. "He never told me he was proud of me," Cairo admitted one evening, his guard lowered by exhaustion and the intimacy of an empty office building. "Not once. I've spent 12 years trying to earn words from a dead man." Nerea had wanted to reach for him then, to offer comfort through touch rather than language. Instead, she had said simply, "Maybe you've been seeking approval from the wrong source." Cairo had looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Maybe I have," he agreed. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. The emotional turning point arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 3 months after Nerea had started working for Montague Industries. Cairo had just emerged from the most brutal board meeting of his career. A hostile investor group had attempted a power play, questioning his leadership, his vision, and his right to occupy his father's chair. He had defended himself with characteristic precision, dismantling their arguments one by one until they had retreated in humiliation, but victory had cost him. Naria found him in his office afterward, standing at the window with his forehead pressed against the glass. His shoulders were taut. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, completely and utterly defeated. "They'll never stop," he said without turning around. "No matter what I achieve, no matter how many billions I generate, I will always be the son trying to fill his father's shoes. I will always be insufficient." Naria crossed the room and stood beside him. "You are not insufficient," she said firmly. "You are the most capable person I have ever met. And anyone who cannot see that is blinded by their own inadequacy, not yours." Cairo turned to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, vulnerable, human. "Why do you believe in me?" he whispered. "You barely know me." Naria held his gaze without wavering. "Because some people," she replied softly, "are worth believing in before they even ask." Cairo's hand rose slowly, hesitantly, and came to rest against her cheek. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. And in the silence of that office, surrounded by glass and steel and the weight of an empire neither had chosen, Cairo Montague realized something terrifying. He was falling in love with a woman he could never have. Silvergate had transformed into a wedding celebration. Banners bearing the Montague Cole insignia hung from lampposts along the main avenue. Florists worked overtime to meet the demand for white roses and orchids that would adorn every venue connected to the festivities. Bakeries displayed miniature replicas of the 7-tier wedding cake in their windows. Hotels reported record bookings as guests from around the world arrived to witness what media outlets had dubbed the wedding of the century. Every magazine cover featured Cairo and Rysel. Every entertainment program devoted segments to analyzing her dress, his tuxedo, their guest list, their honeymoon destination. Fashion critics debated whether Rysel would wear her hair up or down. Financial analysts speculated about the merger implications of two such powerful families officially uniting. The city buzzed with anticipation. And at the center of it all, Rysel Cole radiated pure, unfiltered joy. She had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of engagement parties and bridal showers and endless planning sessions. That had consumed her life with the most beautiful kind of obsession. Every detail reflected her vision: the cathedral ceremony, the string quartet, the imported champagne, the guest list that read like a who's who of international influence. "Only 14 days left," Rysel announced during a fitting session, twirling before the mirror in her custom gown. "Can you believe it, Naria? In 2 weeks I'll be Mrs. Cairo Montague." Naria stood behind her sister, adjusting the train of the dress with hands that trembled slightly. "It's beautiful," she managed. "You're beautiful." Rysel caught her sister's reflection in the mirror and frowned. "You seem distracted lately. Is everything all right?" "Just tired," Naria lied, forcing a smile. "The office has been demanding." "Cairo works you too hard," Rysel said with affectionate exasperation. "I've told him 1,000 times to ease up on his staff. But you know how he is, married to that company. Sometimes I wonder if I'm marrying a man or a corporation." She laughed at her own joke, oblivious to the way Naria's face had paled. "He's lucky to have someone who understands him," Naria said quietly. Rysel turned and embraced her sister warmly. "And I'm lucky to have you. My maid of honor, my confidant, my best friend." She pulled back, her blue eyes shining. "Promise me something? Anything. Promise me you'll find happiness like this someday. You deserve someone who looks at you the way Cairo looks at me." Naria's heart cracked down the center, because she knew exactly how Cairo looked at her. And it was nothing like the way he looked at Rysel. 17 floors above the city, Cairo Montague stood in his penthouse surrounded by wedding invitations, seating charts, and a guilt so heavy it threatened to crush him. The countdown clock on his phone read, 13 days, 7 hours, 42 minutes. 13 days until he would stand at the altar. 13 days until he would promise forever to a woman he respected but did not love. 13 days until he would seal himself into a life that looked perfect on the outside and felt hollow on the inside. He had tried to convince himself that this was enough, that love was a luxury, not a necessity. that marriages among families like theirs were built on compatibility, shared values, and mutual benefit, not the chaotic consuming passion that poets romanticized and fools chased. His parents' marriage had been arranged. His grandparents' union had been strategic. For generations, Montagues had wed for advantage and learned affection later. Why should he be any different? But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Naraya, her calm presence in moments of chaos, her gentle voice cutting through his darkest thoughts, the way she noticed things about him that no one else bothered to see, the headaches he hid, the exhaustion he masked, the loneliness that lived beneath his polished exterior. Rissel saw Cairo Montague, the billionaire. Naraya saw Cairo, the man, and that distinction was destroying him. He poured himself a whiskey and stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker below. Somewhere out there, Naraya was probably in her modest apartment, trying to maintain the distance she had been carefully constructing between them for the past 2 weeks. She had stopped staying late at the office. She had started communicating through emails rather than face-to-face conversations. She'd begun addressing him as Mr. Montague again, as though the formality could erase the intimacy they had built. Cairo understood what she was doing. He respected it even. Naraya was protecting herself and protecting him from a catastrophe neither of them could afford. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. His phone buzzed. A message from Rissel, "Missing you tonight. Only 13 more days until forever. I love you." He stared at the words until his vision blurred. Then he typed back, "I love you too." The lie tasted like ash on his tongue. Naraya had become an expert at avoidance. She arrived at the office exactly on time, never early, when she might catch Cairo alone. She scheduled her lunch breaks to coincide with his meetings, ensuring their paths wouldn't cross in the break room. She kept her door closed, her headphones in, her focus locked on spreadsheets and schedules that required no emotional investment. She was building walls, brick by brick, hour by hour. She was reconstructing the boundaries she should never have allowed to crumble in the first place. But walls, she discovered, were useless against memories. Every corner of Montague Industries held traces of moments she couldn't forget. The conference room where he had first called her by her first name, the elevator where they had stood in comfortable silence, neither needing to fill the space with words, his office where she had placed her hand against his cheek and watched something fundamental shift in his eyes. She was haunted by a man she saw every day, and the worst part, the cruelest irony, was that she couldn't even hate him for it. Cairo had never made promises he couldn't keep. He had never declared love or suggested they run away together. He had simply looked at her the way a drowning man looks at shore, and she had looked back. That was their only crime, but it was enough to destroy everything. Naraya's phone displayed a photograph of her and Rissel from last Christmas. 2 sisters laughing over hot chocolate, finally united after a lifetime apart. She had waited 23 years to have a family. She had sacrificed her grandmother's cottage, her peaceful life in Bayshore, her comfort zone, all for the chance to belong to something larger than herself. And now she was on the verge of betraying the one person who had welcomed her without conditions. The guilt was unbearable, but so was the longing. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday night. Naraya had stayed late to finish a quarterly report, assuming Cairo had left hours ago for a charity dinner with Rissel. The office was dark and silent. The cleaning crew long departed, the only light coming from her desk lamp and the city glowing through floor-to-ceiling windows. She didn't hear him approach. "You've been avoiding me." His voice came from the doorway, quiet, tired, stripped of its usual authority. Naraya's fingers froze above her keyboard. She didn't turn around. "I've been working," she replied carefully. "You've been hiding." Cairo stepped into her office, closing the door softly behind him. "You haven't looked me in the eye in 2 weeks. You communicate through emails like I'm a stranger. You call me Mr. Montague like we haven't spent months learning each other's souls." She finally turned to face him. He looked terrible, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. His tie was loosened, his jacket discarded, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. The perfect billionaire had vanished, leaving behind only a man at war with himself. What do you want me to say? Nerea asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth. He took another step toward her. I want you to tell me the truth. The truth will only make things worse. Things are already as bad as they can get, Cairo said. I'm 2 weeks away from marrying your sister, and all I can think about is you. I'm planning a future with someone else while my present is consumed by your absence. I am losing my mind, Nerea. The least you can do is tell me I'm not losing it alone. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You're not alone, she admitted. You were never alone. Cairo closed the remaining distance between them, stopping just inches away. Close enough to touch, close enough to make a mistake that couldn't be undone. I didn't ask for this, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't want this. I was supposed to marry Russell and live the life everyone expected. I was supposed to follow the path my family laid out for me. But then you walked into my world with your quiet strength and your gentle eyes and your ability to see through every wall I've ever built, and He stopped, breathed, started again. I don't know how to go back to pretending you don't exist in the center of everything I feel. Nerea's tears finally escaped, sliding silently down her cheeks. She's my sister, she whispered. She welcomed me when no one else would. She gave me a family, a home, a place to belong. I cannot betray her. I will not. I know. Then why are you here? Cairo reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not quite touching. A phantom caress that somehow hurt more than contact would have. Because I needed you to know, he said. Before I stand at that altar and make vows I'm not sure I can keep. I needed you to know that if things were different, if we had met, in another life, another circumstance, another version of this world where loving you wasn't a betrayal, I would have chosen you. Without hesitation, without regret, Nerea closed her eyes. But things aren't different, she said. No, Cairo agreed. They're not. They stood in the darkness, inches apart, separated by everything that mattered. Two people who had found each other too late, in the wrong circumstances, at the worst possible time. What do we do now? Nerea asked. Cairo stepped back, creating distance that felt like miles. We do what we've always done, he said quietly. We survive. We perform. We carry this weight in silence and pray that someday it gets lighter. He walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, knowing you has been the most honest thing in my life. Whatever happens next, I need you to remember that. Then he was gone, and Nerea was left alone in the darkness, her heart shattered into pieces she didn't know how to reassemble. The countdown continued, 12 days, 19 hours, 8 minutes. But, for both of them, time had already run out. Marwan Hale had served the Montague family for 23 years. He had started as a junior security officer when Cairo's father, Victor Montague, still commanded the empire from the corner office on the 42nd floor. Back then, Marwan was 26 years old, freshly discharged from military service, hungry for purpose and direction in a civilian world that felt chaotic and unpredictable. Victor Montague had offered him both. Loyalty, Victor had told him during that first interview, his silver hair, gleaming under the office lights, is the only currency that never devalues. Give me your loyalty, Mr. Hale, and I will give you a home. Marwan had given it without reservation. He had protected Victor through hostile takeover attempts and corporate espionage scandals. He had stood guard during family crises and business negotiations that determined the fate of thousands of employees. He had watched Victor build Montague Industries into the titan it became, and he had been present, standing just outside the hospital room, when Victor drew his final breath 12 years ago. When Cairo assumed control of the company, Marwan had transferred his devotion seamlessly. The son carried his father's intensity, his drive, his commitment to excellence. Cairo was younger, certainly, and occasionally more reckless in his ambitions, but the core remained the same. Montague blood demanded Montague loyalty, and Marwan Hale was nothing if not loyal. Over 2 decades, he had risen from junior officer to chief of security, a position that granted him access to every floor, every system, every secret the company contained. He managed a team of 47 security personnel. He oversaw surveillance protocols, background investigations, and threat assessments. He knew which executives were having affairs, which board members were skimming expense accounts, which competitors were attempting to plant moles within the organization. Information was power, and Marwan wielded it with surgical precision. But he never used that power for personal gain. He never blackmailed the unfaithful executives or exposed the embezzling board members. Instead, he cataloged everything, filed it away in mental compartments, and deployed knowledge only when the company's interests demanded protection. The Montague name was sacred. The Montague reputation was everything, and Marwan had appointed himself its guardian. The suspicion began with small observations. Marwan had survived 2 decades in corporate security by trusting his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The patterns were subtle, so subtle that anyone else would have dismissed them as coincidence, but Marwan hadn't built his career on dismissing coincidences. Cairo had started working later. This, in itself, wasn't unusual. The CEO often stayed past midnight during acquisition negotiations or quarterly reporting periods, but these late nights had no corresponding business justification, no major deals pending, no urgent deadlines approaching. Just Cairo, alone in his office, night after night, with only his executive assistant for company. Naria Cole. Marwan had conducted her background check personally when she joined the company 8 months ago. She was clean. No criminal record, no suspicious associations, no red flags of any kind. Her only notable connection was her relationship to Rysel Cole, which had actually been viewed as an asset. Having the CEO's future sister-in-law as his assistant created a convenient narrative of family integration. But lately, Marwan had noticed changes in their dynamic. The way Cairo's eyes followed her when she crossed the office floor. The way Naraya's posture softened whenever she entered his presence. The quiet conversations that stopped abruptly when others approached. The shared glances that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Individually, these observations meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern that made Marwan profoundly uneasy. He began watching more carefully. Security cameras throughout Montague Industries recorded footage on a continuous loop, storing 30 days of material before automatic deletion. Marwan accessed the archives with his administrative credentials, pulling footage from the 42nd floor, the executive level, and reviewing it frame by frame during his off hours. What he found confirmed his fears. 3 weeks ago, Cairo and Naria standing at his office window after hours, their shoulders nearly touching as they gazed at the city lights. 2 weeks ago, Naria placing her hand briefly on Cairo's arm during what appeared to be an emotional conversation. 10 days ago, Cairo entering Naraya's office and closing the door behind him, remaining inside for over an hour with no documented meeting on either calendar. The footage was circumstantial. Nothing explicitly inappropriate appeared on camera. But Marwan recognized intimacy when he saw it. He understood the difference between professional interaction and personal connection. Something was developing between Cairo Montague and Naria Cole, something that could destroy everything. The discovery happened on a Wednesday evening. Marwan typically ended his shifts at 9 p.m., transferring overnight monitoring responsibilities to his second-in-command. But tonight, an anomaly in the building's access logs had caught his attention. A door to the secondary stairwell on the 42nd floor had registered an unauthorized entry at 8:47 p.m. Probably not. Cleaning staff occasionally propped doors open for convenience, triggering false alerts in the security system. But Marwan believed in verifying everything personally. He rode the elevator to the executive level, badge in hand, prepared to reset the door sensor and document the incident for his morning report. The floor was dark except for emergency lighting and the glow emanating from a single office at the far end of the corridor. Naraya's office. Marwan's footsteps slowed as he approached. The door was closed but not latched, leaving a gap of perhaps 2 inches through which soft light and softer voices escaped. He should have announced his presence. He should have knocked, identified himself, performed his security duties with professionalism and transparency. Instead, he stopped, and he listened. Cannot keep doing this. Naraya's voice, strained with emotion. Every time I see you, I feel like I'm betraying her. Every conversation we have feels stolen. This has to stop, Cairo. We have to stop. A long pause. Then Cairo's voice, raw and stripped of its usual authority. I know you're right. I know this is impossible, but walking away from you feels like cutting off my own oxygen supply. You're the only person who makes me feel like I'm not performing a role. You're the only one who sees— Don't. Naraya interrupted. Please don't say it. If you say it out loud, I won't be able to pretend anymore. I won't be able to look at Rizal without seeing the words written on my face. Marwan leaned closer to the gap, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the narrow opening, he could see them standing near her desk, close but not touching. Cairo's hand was raised, hovering near Naraya's face, in a gesture of longing that stopped just short of contact. Her eyes were closed. Tears glistened on her cheeks. I never wanted to hurt her, Cairo whispered. She's a good person. She doesn't deserve this. Neither do we, Naraya replied. But what we want doesn't matter. What matters is what's right. And this, whatever this is between us, it isn't right. It can't be. Cairo lowered his hand. The wedding is in 12 days, he said flatly. 12 days, and I'll make vows that will bind me to her forever. After that, you and I will be family, brother and sister-in-law. We'll sit across from each other at holiday dinners and pretend that none of this ever happened. Yes, Naraya said quietly. We will. And that's supposed to be enough? It has to be. Marwan stepped back from the door, his mind racing. This was worse than he had imagined. This wasn't a fleeting attraction or an inappropriate flirtation. This was something deep, something dangerous, something that threatened to detonate in the middle of Silvergate's most anticipated social event. The wedding of Cairo Montague and Rizal Cole was 13 days away. The media attention was already overwhelming, and the CEO of Montague Industries was in love with his fiancée's sister. If this became public, if someone less discreet than Marwan discovered what was happening, the scandal would be catastrophic. Stock prices would plummet. Investors would flee. The company's reputation, carefully cultivated over 3 generations, would be reduced to tabloid fodder. Everything Victor Montague had built would crumble. Everything Marwan had spent 23 years protecting would be destroyed. He retreated silently down the corridor, his security training ensuring that his footsteps made no sound on the polished floor. His hands were steady, but his thoughts churned with competing impulses. Loyalty to the Montague family demanded that he protect Cairo. Loyalty to the Montague company demanded that he protect its reputation. But what if those two loyalties were suddenly in conflict? Marwan reached the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, sealing him in solitude, he made a decision. This situation could not be allowed to continue. The wedding had to proceed as planned. And if Cairo Montague wouldn't protect the company from his own weakness, then Marwan Hale would have to do it for him. Whatever that required. Cairo found her in the emergency stairwell on the 39th floor. She was sitting on the concrete steps, her back pressed against the cold metal railing, her knees drawn up to her chest like a child seeking protection from monsters that lived in the dark. The fluorescent emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across her face, illuminating the tears that continued to fall despite her obvious attempts to stop them. She looked utterly, completely destroyed. And it was his fault. Naraya. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer. Desperate, reverent, filled with an anguish he couldn't contain. She didn't look up. You shouldn't be here. Someone will see. I don't care. You should. Her voice cracked. Rizal just walked in on us, staring at each other like we were the only 2 people in the world. Your board is probably drafting your termination papers. The entire company knows. The entire city knows. And you're here in a stairwell with the woman who just ruined your life. Cairo descended the steps slowly, as though approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. He lowered himself onto the stair beside her, leaving a careful distance between them, close enough to offer comfort, far enough to respect boundaries that no longer made sense in the wreckage of their circumstances. You didn't ruin my life, he said quietly. Don't. Naraya finally lifted her head, and the devastation in her eyes nearly undid him completely. Don't lie to me. Not now, not after everything. We both know exactly what happened here, and we both know who's responsible. We're both responsible. No. She shook her head violently. I was your employee, your fiancé's sister. I should have quit the moment I felt something shift between us. I should have recognized the danger and removed myself from the situation. That's what a decent person would have done. That's what Rizal would have expected from someone she trusted. Her voice broke on her sister's name, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I had a family, she whispered. For the first time in my entire life, I had people who wanted me, a sister who loved me, a place where I belonged, and I destroyed it. I destroyed all of it because I couldn't. She pressed her palms against her eyes. Because I couldn't stop caring about you. Cairo reached for her then, slowly, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, and he felt her entire body tremble beneath his touch. The contact was minimal, barely there, but it carried the weight of every moment they had shared over the past 8 months. Every late-night conversation, every quiet understanding, every instance when their eyes had met across a crowded room and communicated volumes without a single word. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "What happened between us was not a mistake. It was not something shameful or dirty or wrong. It was two people finding each other in circumstances that made acting on their feelings impossible. We fought it. We resisted it. We tried to do the right thing. And we failed. Did we?" Cairo turned to face her fully. "We never crossed physical lines. We never acted on what we felt. The only crime we committed was caring about each other more than we were supposed to. Is that really so unforgivable?" Naraya lowered her hands from her eyes and met his gaze. The pain in her expression was so raw, so exposed, that he felt it echo through his own chest. "It is to Rizal," she said. "It doesn't matter that we didn't." She struggled to find words. "What matters is that you looked at me the way you were supposed to look at her. What matters is that she can see it in those photographs. Everyone can see it. The whole world knows that the man she was about to marry has feelings for someone else. The whole world knows I have feelings for you," Cairo corrected quietly. "Not someone else. You, Naraya Cole, the woman who noticed when I was hurting, the woman who saw through every mask I've ever worn, the woman who made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, like I was more than a name and a bank account and a set of expectations I never asked to carry." Naraya closed her eyes. "Please stop." "Why?" "Because you're making this harder." Her voice was barely audible. "You're making it impossible for me to do what I need to do." A cold dread settled in Cairo's stomach. "What are you talking about?" Naraya rose to her feet, putting distance between them. The stairwell felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing inward, the air growing thick with words neither of them wanted to speak. "I'm resigning," she said, effective immediately. "I'll clear out my desk tonight, after everyone is gone. By tomorrow morning I'll be on a train back to Bayshore." "No, it's not your decision. You're running away." Cairo stood, his height suddenly overwhelming in the confined space. "You're letting fear drive you out of a city you've called home for 3 years. You're abandoning everything you built here because you think disappearing will somehow fix this. It won't fix it." Naraya's voice hardened with resolve she didn't fully feel. "Nothing will fix it. But my presence here makes everything worse. Every time someone sees me, they'll remember the scandal. Every time you're in a meeting, executives will wonder if your assistant is also your mistress. Every time Rizal," she choked on her sister's name, "if she ever decides to forgive you, my existence will be a constant reminder of your betrayal. I have to leave. For you. For her. For everyone." "What about for yourself?" Cairo demanded. "What about what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." "It matters to me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Naraya turned away, unable to face the intensity in his eyes. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "Please don't make me admit things that will only cause more damage. We're already drowning. Don't pull me under further." But Cairo couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was standing there preparing to walk out of his life forever. "I need you to understand something," he said, moving toward her until only inches separated them. "Whatever happens next, whatever the board decides, whatever Rizal chooses, whatever the media reports, I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. It's not confusion. It's not infatuation. It's not some crisis-fueled attraction that will fade when the pressure lifts. Naria's shoulders shook with silent sobs. I care about you, Naria. Deeply, completely. In a way I have never cared about anyone in my life. Cairo's voice dropped to a whisper. And I know the timing is wrong. I know the circumstances are impossible. I know that everything about this situation is a disaster of my own making. But I cannot let you walk away believing you were a mistake, because you weren't. You are the most genuine thing that has ever happened to me. She turned slowly, her tear-streaked face lifted toward his. And what about Ricel? The question landed like a blade. Cairo exhaled slowly. I owe her the truth. I owe her honesty about what I feel and what I don't feel. I owe her the chance to decide her own future based on reality rather than performance. She deserves someone who loves her the way she deserves to be loved. Fully, without reservation, without secret longings for someone else. And that's not you. No, he admitted. It's not. Naria pressed her hands against her face, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was saying. For months, she had convinced herself that whatever existed between them was one-sided, a pathetic infatuation on her part that Cairo tolerated out of politeness. She had told herself that he would marry Ricel as planned, that she would fade into the background of family gatherings, that eventually these feelings would diminish into something manageable. But he was standing here telling her that her feelings were not one-sided, that he cared for her as deeply as she cared for him, that the connection she thought she had imagined was as real and as powerful as anything she had ever experienced. It should have been a relief. Instead, it only made everything more painful. I don't know what to do, she confessed. I don't know how to exist in a world where loving you is the truest thing I've ever felt, and also the worst thing I've ever done. Cairo reached for her hands, taking them gently in his own. We'll figure it out, he said. Together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But the weight of the scandal, the pain in her sister's eyes, the chaos consuming everything around them, it pressed down on her shoulders like an anchor dragging her toward depths she wasn't sure she could survive. I'm still leaving, she said finally. Not forever, but I need time. I need space to think. I need to be somewhere that doesn't remind me of everything I've lost. Cairo nodded slowly, his grip on her hands tightening briefly before releasing. When you're ready, he said, I'll be here. What if I'm never ready? He managed a broken smile. Then I'll wait anyway. The stairwell fell silent except for the distant hum of building machinery and the sound of two hearts, breaking simultaneously, one from the weight of leaving, the other from the agony of watching her go. Before we continue with how Cairo and Naria navigate the aftermath of this impossible situation, make sure you've subscribed to our channel and liked this video. Stories like these remind us that love isn't always simple, and the heart doesn't always choose convenience. If you've ever cared for someone you weren't supposed to, if you've ever struggled between what's expected and what's authentic, then stay with us. This journey isn't over yet. The Cole family estate sat on a hillside overlooking the eastern edge of Silvergate, surrounded by 12 acres of manicured gardens, ancient oak trees, and silence so complete it felt almost sacred. Cairo had visited this property dozens of times over the past 3 years for engagement celebrations, holiday dinners, Sunday brunches, with Ricel's parents, and countless intimate evenings with his fiancée on the terrace that overlooked the city lights below. He had always admired the estate's grandeur, its quiet testimony to generations of Cole family success. Tonight, driving up the winding gravel driveway in the fading light of dusk, the mansion felt less like a second home and more like a courthouse where his sentence would be delivered. The scandal was now 48 hours old. News cycles had moved from breathless shock to analytical dissection. Experts debated the implications for Montague Industries. Relationship columnists wrote think pieces about betrayal and forgiveness. Social media remained relentlessly divided between those who condemned Cairo as a heartless villain and those who romanticized his forbidden connection with Naria. The wedding, officially, had been postponed. But everyone understood that postponement was merely a polite word for cancellation. Cairo parked his car in the circular drive and sat for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the illuminated windows of the mansion. Somewhere behind those walls, Rissel was waiting. She had texted him 3 hours ago, a simple message that contained neither fury nor accusation. "We need to talk. Come to the house, please." The word "please" had broken something inside him. After everything he had done, after the humiliation he had caused her, she was still saying please. He didn't deserve her grace, but he would face her anyway. The housekeeper led him through the marble foyer and down a long corridor lined with oil paintings of Cole ancestors, stern-faced patriarchs and elegant matriarchs who seemed to watch his passage with silent judgment. The estate was quieter than he had ever experienced it, as though the staff had been dismissed to provide privacy for the conversation that was about to occur. Rissel waited in the library. It was her favorite room in the house, a wood-paneled sanctuary filled with leather-bound books, antique furniture, and a massive stone fireplace that crackled with flames despite the mild evening temperature. She stood at the window, her back to the door, her silhouette framed against the darkening sky. She had changed out of the disheveled clothes he had seen at the office. Now she wore a simple, cream-colored dress that made her look almost ethereal, beautiful in a fragile, breakable way that made his chest ache with guilt. "Thank you for coming," she said, without turning around. "Of course." Cairo's voice felt foreign in his own throat. "Rissel, please." She finally turned to face him, and he saw that her eyes, though red-rimmed, were dry. Whatever tears she had left to cry, she had cried them in private. "Let me speak first. I've spent the last 2 days preparing what I want to say, and if I don't say it now, I'm not sure I ever will." He nodded, lowering himself into a leather armchair near the fireplace. Rissel remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her, with the composure of a woman who had been raised to maintain dignity in every circumstance, even circumstances that would justify screaming, throwing objects, or dissolving into hysterics. "I loved you," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I want you to understand that clearly before we discuss anything else. I loved you, Cairo. Not your money, not your status, not what you could offer my family or my future. I loved the man I believed you were. I loved the future I thought we would build together. Rissel, I'm not finished." She held up a hand, and he fell silent. "When I saw those photographs, my first instinct was denial. I told myself they were manipulated, fake, some competitor's attempt to sabotage your company before the wedding. I convinced myself that there was an explanation because the alternative, that the man I loved had fallen for my own sister, was too painful to accept." She paused, gathering herself. "But then I looked at the pictures again, really looked, and I saw something that I had been blind to for months." Her voice trembled slightly. "I saw the way you looked at her, the way you held yourself in her presence. I saw tenderness in your expression that I had never witnessed when you looked at me. Not once, not in 3 years." The words hung in the air, terrible and true. "How long have you known?" Cairo asked quietly. "How long have you suspected?" Rissel's composure flickered, a brief crack in the porcelain mask she had constructed. "Honestly, I think part of me has known for a while. I noticed the way you changed after Naria started working for you. You seemed lighter, more present. You laughed more easily, even when I wasn't the one making you laugh. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that work was simply going well, that the wedding excitement was lifting your spirits." She shook her head slowly. "I lied to myself because the truth was unbearable. Because admitting that my fiancé had fallen for my sister would mean admitting that the life I had planned, the wedding, the marriage, the children, the future, was built on a foundation that didn't exist." Cairo rose from his chair and crossed to where she stood, stopping an arm's length away. "I am so sorry," he said, and the words carried the full weight of his remorse. "I never meant to hurt you. I never set out to develop feelings for Naria. When she started working for me, I saw her only as your sister, an extension of you in some ways. I had no intention of—" "I know." Rissel's voice was surprisingly gentle. "That's what makes this so hard. If you had seduced her deliberately, if this had been some calculated affair, I could hate you. I could wrap myself in righteous anger and move forward with my dignity intact. But you didn't choose this, did you? No. The admission felt like surrender. I tried to fight it. For months I told myself that what I felt for her would fade. I convinced myself that duty and commitment would eventually override whatever was growing between us. I was wrong. Do you love her? The question was direct, unflinching, demanding truth. Cairo hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because speaking it aloud felt like delivering a final blow to a woman who had already suffered too much at his hands. Yes, he said finally. I love her. Rissel closed her eyes. For a long moment she simply stood there, absorbing the impact of his confession. When she opened her eyes again, they glistened with tears she refused to let fall. Thank you for being honest, she whispered. How can you thank me? I've destroyed everything. You've destroyed a wedding. Rissel's voice was measured, thoughtful. You've destroyed an engagement. You've humiliated me publicly in ways that will take years to recover from. But you haven't destroyed me, and you haven't destroyed the truth, which, painful as it is, I would rather have than a lifetime of pretending. She moved toward the fireplace, watching the flames dance behind the iron grate. My parents' marriage was arranged, she said quietly. Did you know that? They barely knew each other when they wed. My father proposed because it made strategic sense, and my mother accepted because that was what daughters of her station did. They built a partnership, functional, respectable, even affectionate in its way. But I always sensed something missing between them. A spark, a depth, the kind of connection that makes two people feel like they've found home in each other. She turned back to face him. I don't want that, Cairo. I don't want a marriage built on convenience and duty. I don't want to spend 50 years with a man who loves someone else, pretending that contentment is the same as happiness. I refuse to inherit my parents' compromise. What are you saying? Rissel smiled, a sad, beautiful expression that held both heartbreak and liberation. I'm saying that the wedding is canceled, not postponed, canceled. I'm saying that I release you from your engagement to me, with no conditions and no expectations. I'm saying that as much as this hurts, and it hurts more than you will ever understand, I would rather experience this pain now than discover 20 years from now that my husband never truly belonged to me. Cairo felt tears burning behind his own eyes. You deserve so much better than what I've given you. Yes. Her agreement was matter-of-fact, without malice. I do. And someday I'll find it. But not with you. Not knowing what I know now, she crossed the space between them and took his hands in hers. A gesture so unexpectedly tender that it nearly undid him completely. Listen to me carefully, she said. What you feel for Naraya, don't waste it. Don't bury it beneath guilt or obligation or fear of what others will say. The kind of connection you've described, the kind I saw in those photographs, that's rare, Cairo. Most people search their entire lives for someone who sees them the way she sees you. Don't throw it away because the timing was wrong or the circumstances were complicated. How can you say that? After everything? Because I'm not a villain, and neither are you. Rissel released his hands and stepped back. Hearts don't follow schedules. Love doesn't consult calendars. You fell for her while you were engaged to me, and that's a tragedy for all three of us. But the only thing worse than this tragedy would be if everyone involved spent the rest of their lives punishing themselves for something they couldn't control. She moved toward the library door, pausing with her hand on the frame. Go to her, she said. Tell her what you told me. And for God's sake, be happy. Because if my heartbreak results in nothing but misery for everyone, then it was truly pointless. Rissel. Cairo's voice broke. I never deserved you. She smiled one last time, a smile that held sadness, grace, and something that looked almost like peace. No, she agreed softly. You didn't. But perhaps that's exactly why this had to happen. We both deserved someone who would choose us first. Now we both have the chance to find that. She walked out of the library, leaving Cairo alone with the crackling fire and the weight of her forgiveness settling over him like a blanket he hadn't earned. Outside, the night had fully fallen. Stars dotted the sky above the Cole estate, the same stars that Naraya's grandmother had promised would watch over her. Cairo stood at the window for a long time, watching the darkness, processing the conversation that had just occurred. Rizel's grace had freed him from obligation, but it had also confronted him with responsibility. She had given him permission to pursue what his heart truly wanted. Now he had to decide if he was brave enough to accept that permission. The answer, he realized, had never really been in question. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Naraya. "The wedding is off. Rizel released me. I need to see you. Please don't leave Silvergate. Not yet. Not until we talk." He pressed send, and for the first time in months, he felt something that resembled hope. Cairo drove through the streets of Silvergate like a man possessed. The city blurred past his windows, streetlights smearing into golden streaks, buildings dissolving into shadows, traffic signals ignored with reckless abandon. His phone sat on the passenger seat, screen illuminated with the message he had sent to Naraya 30 minutes ago. She hadn't responded. He had called 4 times. Each call had gone directly to voicemail, her gentle voice asking callers to leave a message, promising to return their calls as soon as possible. But the automated tone that followed felt like a door slamming shut, a barrier erected between him and the woman he needed to reach. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, in the hollow ache spreading through his chest, in the mounting panic that accelerated his heartbeat with every passing second. Naraya had said she was leaving. She had talked about returning to Bayshore, about removing herself from the situation, about disappearing so that everyone else could heal. What if she wasn't waiting for his message? What if she was already gone? He pressed harder on the accelerator. The lobby of Naraya's apartment building was empty when Cairo burst through the doors. A security guard looked up from his desk, startled by the disheveled billionaire who had just entered like a hurricane in human form. Recognition flickered across the guard's face. Everyone in Silvergate knew Cairo Montague, especially after the scandal that had consumed every news outlet for the past 2 days. "Mr. Montague," the guard began, rising from his chair, "I don't think—" "Naria Cole," Cairo's voice was breathless, urgent. "Has she left? Have you seen her tonight?" The guard hesitated, glancing at his logbook with obvious discomfort. "Sir, I'm not supposed to share resident information." "Please." The word tore from Cairo's throat with a desperation he had never heard in his own voice. "I need to know if she's still here. I need to find her before she disappears." Something in his expression must have communicated the gravity of the situation, because the guard's resistance crumbled. "She came through about 20 minutes ago," he admitted. "Had a suitcase. Looked like she'd been crying. I asked if she was all right, and she said she was going home. Heading to the train station, I think. 20 minutes. The central train station was a 15-minute drive from here, less if traffic cooperated and speed limits became suggestions rather than rules." "Which entrance?" Cairo demanded. "Front or back?" "Staff entrance. The one that leads to the alley." Cairo was already running before the guard finished speaking. The staff entrance opened onto a narrow alleyway behind the building, lit by a single flickering lamp that cast uneven shadows across the pavement. Delivery trucks used this passage during daylight hours, but at night it was deserted, a forgotten space between the polished facade of the building and the reality of the service infrastructure that kept it functioning. Cairo slammed through the door and stopped. She was there. Naraya stood at the far end of the alley, a single suitcase at her feet, her hand raised to hail a taxi that was pulling to the curb. She wore the same clothes she had been wearing at the office, practical, understated. Nothing that suggested she had packed for a permanent departure. But the suitcase told a different story. The defeated slope of her shoulders told a different story. She was leaving, and she hadn't planned to say goodbye. Naraya. Her name echoed off the brick walls, sharp and desperate in the nighttime stillness. She turned, her face illuminated by the taxi's headlights, and Cairo saw shock replace determination, confusion replace resolve. "Cairo." Her voice was barely audible. "What are you doing here?" He crossed the alley in long strides, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain she must be able to hear it. The taxi driver rolled down his window, clearly uncertain whether to wait or leave, but Cairo ignored him completely. His focus had narrowed to a single point, the woman standing before him, poised to disappear from his life. "You didn't answer my message," he said, stopping a few feet away from her. I turned off my phone. Naria's eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks pale. I couldn't handle any more. The notifications, the messages. People calling me names I don't want to repeat. I just needed silence. "So, you decided to run?" "I decided to survive." Her voice cracked. "There's a difference." Cairo took another step toward her. "Rizal canceled the wedding." Naria blinked. "What?" "I went to see her tonight, at the estate. I told her the truth, about how I feel, about what happened between us, about everything. And she ended it, officially, permanently." The information seemed to destabilize Naria. She reached for the brick wall beside her, steadying herself against something solid. "That doesn't change anything," she whispered. "It changes everything." "No." She shook her head, and Cairo could see tears gathering in her eyes again. "Rizal is still my sister. This city still knows what I did. Your reputation is still damaged. There will always be people who look at us and see scandal, betrayal. Two people who destroyed a family for their own selfish desires. Let them look. Cairo, I mean it." He closed the remaining distance between them, standing close enough to touch her but keeping his hands at his sides. He needed her to hear him clearly, without the distraction of physical contact. "I have spent my entire life caring about what people think. I have curated every decision, every relationship, every public appearance to maintain an image that was never truly mine. I built a version of Cairo Montague that the world would approve of, and I lost myself somewhere inside that construction." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "You're the only person who ever saw past it. You're the only one who noticed when I was struggling, who called me out when I was being distant, who made me feel like I was more than a name on a building or a number on a balance sheet. You saw me, Naria, the real me, the version I had forgotten existed." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm terrified of what happens if I stay. I'm terrified of what people will say, how they'll treat us, whether this connection we have can survive the weight of public scrutiny and family fractures. I'm terrified that we'll try to build something real and discover that it was only beautiful because it was forbidden." "And if we don't try?" Cairo asked gently. "If you get in that taxi and disappear to Bayshore, what then?" Naria closed her eyes. "Then I spend the rest of my life wondering. Then I bury these feelings like I've buried every other good thing that ever happened to me. Then I convince myself that safety is more important than love, and I settle for survival instead of living." "Is that what you want?" "No." The word escaped her like a confession. "It's not what I want. It's never been what I want." Cairo reached for her then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to reject him, to choose the taxi and the train and the quiet cottage in Bayshore over the chaos that loving him would inevitably bring. She didn't pull away. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. She was trembling beneath his touch, but her eyes were open now, fixed on his with an intensity that matched his own. "Stay," he whispered. "Not for me, not because I'm asking. Stay because you deserve to stop running from the things that make you happy. Stay because your grandmother told you that you were worth more than the people who failed to see it. Stay because the quietest souls carry the loudest light, and this city needs your light, Naria. I need your light." A sob escaped her throat. "You remember what she wrote?" "I remember everything you've ever told me." Cairo's voice was thick with emotion. Every story about Bayshore, every memory of Josephine, every detail about the cottage with the peeling blue paint and the porch, that creaks, and the view of the ocean from your bedroom window. I remember because those things matter to you, and everything that matters to you matters to me. Naria's hands rose to cover his, pressing them more firmly against her face. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be with you publicly. I don't know how to face my sister, or your mother, or the media, or any of the people who are going to judge us for the rest of our lives. Neither do I." Cairo managed a small smile. "But I'd rather figure it out with you than face another day pretending I don't love you." The words landed with visible impact. Naria's breath caught. Her eyes widened. "You love me?" I love you." He said it clearly, without hesitation, without qualification. "I love you, Naria Cole. I have loved you for longer than I was willing to admit, through months of denial and resistance, and telling myself that what I felt was wrong. But it wasn't wrong. The only wrong thing was hiding it. The only mistake was pretending that duty could replace truth." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for doubt, for deception, for any indication that these words were less than genuine. She found none. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you since the night you told me about your father. Since the moment I realized that beneath all the polish and the power, you were just a man trying to earn approval from someone who could never give it. I loved you, and I hated myself for it, and I tried so hard to make it stop, but it didn't stop. No." A fragile smile crossed her face. "It never stopped." Cairo leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. The same gesture captured in the photograph. That had started everything. The same intimate connection that had revealed their secret to the world. But this time there were no hidden cameras, no anonymous leakers, no scandal waiting to erupt. This time, there was only truth. "Don't get in that taxi," he murmured against her skin. "Don't disappear to Bayshore. Don't spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. Stay here with me. And let's build something that doesn't need to be hidden. Let's be the thing we were too afraid to become." Naria pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "What about everything else? The fallout, the consequences? We'll face them together." Cairo's hand slid down to take hers. "Whatever comes, the media, the board, your family, mine, we face it as a unit. No more secrets, no more shame. Just us, choosing each other, every single day." She looked at the taxi still waiting at the curb. Then she looked at the man standing before her, offering her not safety, not convenience, not the quiet life she had planned to return to, but love. Real, complicated, messy, beautiful love. The choice, in the end, wasn't difficult at all. "Tell the driver to leave," she said. Cairo turned to the taxi, raised a hand, and watched as the vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. When he turned back to Naria, she was smiling, really smiling. For the first time since the scandal had broken, she looked like herself again. "I'm staying," she said. "You're staying," he confirmed. And in that narrow alley, beneath flickering lights and scattered stars, two people who had found each other against impossible odds finally stopped hiding from the truth of what they had become. They had become each other's home. If this moment made your heart ache, if you've ever stood at a crossroads between safety and love, between what's expected and what's authentic, take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We tell stories about the choices that define us, the connections that transform us, and the courage it takes to follow our hearts. You're part of this journey now. Stay with us. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Monday morning. Cairo had chosen the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, the same hotel where the fateful photograph had been taken, the same location that had become synonymous with his scandal. His publicist had argued vehemently against the venue choice, insisting that it invited unnecessary comparisons and reminded the media of the very incident they were trying to move past. But Cairo had been adamant. He was done running from uncomfortable truths. He was done crafting narratives designed to minimize damage and maximize public approval. If he was going to address the world, he would do so from the place where his life had changed forever, not as an act of defiance, but as an acknowledgement that transformation often begins in the locations we least expect. The ballroom filled quickly. Journalists from every major outlet claimed seats in neat rows of folding chairs. Camera crews positioned themselves along the perimeter, adjusting lenses and checking audio levels. Photographers jostled for optimal angles near the front. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, vultures circling, waiting to see whether the wounded Billionaire would offer them fresh meat or disappoint them with carefully rehearsed deflections. Cairo stepped onto the elevated platform at precisely 10 a.m. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no tie, no ostentatious accessories, nothing. That suggested he was trying to project an image of power or control. He looked, for perhaps the first time in his public life, like an ordinary man facing extraordinary circumstances. He adjusted the microphone and surveyed the crowd. Then he began. "Thank you all for coming." His voice was steady, measured, carrying none of the arrogance that journalists had come to associate with Billionaire's statements. "I know there has been significant speculation about my personal life over the past week. I'm here today to address that speculation directly, not through representatives. Not through carefully worded press releases, but personally." He paused, gathering himself. "The photographs that circulated last week were authentic. They depicted real moments between myself and Naria Cole, who was employed as my executive assistant and who is also the sister of my former fiancée, Rysel Cole. I will not insult your intelligence by claiming those images were taken out of context or manipulated in any way." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Journalists exchanged glances, surprised by the admission. "What I will tell you," Cairo continued, "is that the relationship depicted in those photographs was not an affair. Miss Cole and I never engaged in physical intimacy during my engagement to her sister. Our connection was emotional, a deep friendship that evolved into feelings neither of us anticipated or sought. We fought against those feelings for months. We tried to maintain appropriate boundaries. We failed." He let the silence stretch for a moment. "I take full responsibility for that failure. As the employer, as the person engaged to another woman, as the one with more power in the dynamic, the obligation to maintain distance fell primarily on my shoulders. Naria Cole did nothing wrong except care about someone she worked with. Any blame, any condemnation, any judgment should be directed at me, not at her." A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Montague, are you confirming that you and Miss Cole are now in a relationship?" "I'm confirming that I love her." The words landed like thunderclaps. "I'm confirming that my engagement to Rysel Cole has ended with her gracious consent and understanding. And I'm confirming that, moving forward, I intend to build a life with Naria, openly, honestly, without the secrecy that caused so much pain." Another journalist stood without being called upon. "What about allegations that you betrayed your fiancé, that you humiliated the Cole family? Do you have any response to critics who say you've destroyed two women's lives for your own selfish desires?" Cairo met the question head-on. "I have caused pain. I don't deny that. Rysel deserved better than a fiancé whose heart belonged elsewhere. She deserved honesty from the beginning, honesty I was too afraid to provide. My failure to be truthful created a situation where everyone suffered more than necessary. For that, I am deeply sorry." He gripped the podium edges. "But I refuse to accept that loving someone is selfish. I refuse to accept that following your heart after acknowledging the truth is somehow worse than spending a lifetime in a marriage built on performance. Rysel and I have spoken at length. We have reached an understanding. Whatever criticism the public wishes to levy, I ask that it be directed at me alone. The women in this situation deserve compassion, not condemnation." The press conference continued for another 45 minutes. Questions about Montague Industries stock prices, about his mother's reaction, about wedding deposits and social embarrassment, and the logistics of entangling two prominent families. Cairo answered each query with patience and transparency, offering nothing but truth, hiding behind nothing but accountability. When it ended, the cameras continued rolling as he stepped off the platform and walked toward the exit. He didn't look back. The aftermath was exactly as divided as Cairo had anticipated. Conservative commentators decried his behavior as symptomatic of moral decay among the wealthy. Religious leaders used his situation as sermon material about the dangers of emotional infidelity. Business analysts questioned whether a CEO who couldn't manage his personal life could be trusted to manage a multinational corporation. But other voices emerged as well. Relationship experts praised his honesty, noting that many people spend decades trapped in loveless marriages rather than confronting uncomfortable truths. Women's magazines publish think pieces about the complexity of human connection, about how feelings dawn. Follow convenient timelines about the courage required to prioritize authenticity over expectation. Social media divided into warring factions, those who condemned and those who understood. The stock price stabilized after an initial dip. Investors, it turned out, cared more about quarterly earnings than romantic entanglements. The board expressed formal displeasure, but took no action beyond a strongly worded statement about personal conduct expectations. Montague Industries continued operating, continued profiting, continued proving that corporations are ultimately more resilient than the scandals of their leaders. Naria watched the press conference from Cairo's penthouse, her hands pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He had defended her. Publicly, unequivocally, without hesitation, he had stood before the entire world and declared that she was not a homewrecker, not a seductress, not a villain in someone else's love story. He had taken the weight of judgment onto his own shoulders and shielded her from the worst of it. When he returned home that evening, she was waiting at the door. "You didn't have to do that," she said as he entered. "Yes, I did. People will still judge me. They'll still whisper when I walk past. Let them whisper." Cairo pulled her into his arms. "We know the truth. That's what matters." She pressed her face against his chest, breathing him in. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we begin." The months that followed were intentional. Cairo and Naria did not rush into cohabitation or public displays of affection. They understood that their relationship, born under such complicated circumstances, required a foundation stronger than passion alone. They needed to prove, to themselves as much as to anyone else, that what they felt could survive outside the pressure cooker of secrecy and scandal. They dated properly. Dinners at quiet restaurants where they talked for hours about everything and nothing. Weekend trips to Bayshore, where Naria showed him her grandmother's cottage and the ocean view that had shaped her childhood. Long walks through Silvergate neighborhoods they had never explored, discovering the city together, as though seeing it for the first time. Cairo learned to slow down. For years, his life had been measured in acquisitions and quarterly reports and board meetings that demanded constant forward motion. But with Naria, he discovered the value of stillness. He learned to cook, badly at first but with increasing competence. He read books she recommended and debated their meanings over morning coffee. He sat beside her on the creaking porch in Bayshore and watched sunsets paint the sky in colors he had never taken time to notice. Naria learned to trust. Her entire life had been shaped by abandonment, her father's rejection, her mother's death, her grandmother's eventual passing. She had armored herself against connection, convinced that everyone she loved would eventually leave. But Cairo remained. Day after day, week after week, he remained. He showed up when he said he would. He called when he promised to call. He proved, through countless small consistencies, that some people stay. Their relationship was not perfect. They argued about his tendency toward overwork and her habit of withdrawing when overwhelmed. They navigated awkward encounters with mutual acquaintances who didn't know how to react to their partnership. They faced ongoing media attention that sometimes felt suffocating, intrusive, impossible to escape. But they faced it together. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the judgment began to fade. New scandals claimed the public's attention. Other billionaires made other mistakes. The news cycle moved on, as it always does, leaving Cairo and Naria in a space that felt increasingly like normalcy. One evening, 6 months after the press conference, they sat on the balcony of Cairo's penthouse watching the city lights flicker below. "I never thought I would be happy," Naria said quietly. "Not really happy. I thought contentment was the best I could hope for. Survival, safety." Cairo took her hand, and now, she turned to look at him, the man who had upended her life, shattered her carefully, constructed walls, and given her something she had never dared to expect. "Now I understand what my grandmother meant," she said, "about the quietest souls carrying the loudest light. I was so busy trying to be invisible that I forgot I was allowed to shine." Cairo raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You shine," he murmured. "You've always shone. The world was just too busy looking elsewhere to notice." She smiled, a full, radiant expression that transformed her entire face. "I'm glad you noticed. I'm glad you let me."